Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar series. If you have any questions today, please enter them in the question section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 20th edition of CropTalk, and today we're going to be looking at identifying seedling diseases. Some of the crop is starting to come up now. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get David Kaminsky on. He'll walk us through a few of the disease issues that some of the seedling or some of the crops can get at seedling stage. And after that, we're going to flip over to our crop scouting panel, and we've got a list of questions again that came in through the week, so we'll be able to get those answered. And just a brief update before we get into Dave's presentation. Just wanted to show again the Manitoba Crop Weather Report. This is available online for every region. I just put the Southwest up because that's the one I spend a lot of my time in, and but as you can see, I think the biggest thing to notice from the information here is our growing degree days. Our growing degree days are definitely lower than normal, and I think with the last few days here with the heat and the wind, I think that'll change for the next update, but we definitely are below there, and we are lower for our precipitation, lower than normal, and with the winds that have been coming out this last couple of days here, things are definitely drying out, and it's might be an issue later on if we don't start to see some moisture happening. So a little bit of an update. Harvest continues. Several producers have completed, but north of Souris yesterday, or in the Souris area yesterday, I did see several producers still combining canola. I think that's one of the crops that more producers are trying to get off. You do see the odd field of wheat yet, but I think that's kind of second. The guys are trying to get the canola off. It's actually surprisingly in decent shape, and I think there's some markets for it. So I think that's the big goal for it now. I did see a sample of flax yesterday afternoon that overwintered. Didn't look great. A lot of whitish type mold on it. They were just taking it to the elevator to see what they would grade it, and we'll I guess see from there. But they did get it off as well. Warm weather plus strong winds have let producers get into the field and get some good progress in planting. Seeding conditions have improved a lot. Our soil temperatures have risen from 4 to 7 to 9 to 13 this last week. So we're definitely in a situation where seed in the ground is going to germinate fast, and it's gonna emerge fast. So that's good for the growing conditions. I think the biggest issue we might face over the next week here, if we don't get any precipitation, might be seeding into some dry ground. Seeding varies throughout the province, with the central and the southwest here about 25% complete. You get to the north, so north of the Riding Mountain National Park up into that Grandview Dauphin area, and that way you're looking up around 40% complete. They didn't experience some of the rain that occurred last fall in the southwest, which has changed things quite a bit this year for seeding percentages. Then you look at the eastern and interlake regions; they're about 50% complete. So definitely a range of seeding throughout the province. And when you look at our overall seeding right now, we're about 42% complete. It is down from last year at this time where we were 50% complete, and our 3-year average is around 55% complete. So we're behind where we normally would be at this time, but we still aren't too far behind, and it's amazing how much can get done in a short period of time. So it'll be interesting to see what some of the stats come up for next week. We're getting into that third week of May here. We're in the third week of May, and if you remember from last week, this is kind of one of the critical weeks for getting the crop in. Once we get into the fourth week of May, we start seeing some dropping off of the yield averages, some significant drop-offs. So I can see where a lot of producers are going to want to get as much as they can in this weekend and get the crop growing. As I mentioned, the central and the southwest are still dealing with wet fields. Recent warm weather has definitely helped, but it's still an issue in a lot of areas. Some early seeded crop has started to emerge and over the last couple of days, but also with that is a large range of weeds have started to come up, and with that early emergence and some seeds starting to come through the ground, that brings on our topic for today, where we have Dave Kaminsky on. So I'm going to pass the screen over to David now and talk about some seedling diseases, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Lionel. Good morning, everyone. Lionel asked me to talk about the possibility of seeing seedling diseases at this time of year, and the crop is very early in development, so you'll have to be down on your hands and knees scratching in order to see a lot of the diseases, including abiotic diseases, those not caused by pathogens, that are there. I want to start with one of the questions that came in. How do I advance my slides? Hello?
Should be able to just click on the bottom of your screen and in the left-hand corner there, right in the left-hand corner of your first slide. There you go.
So this question was a plant from the Souris area with strong winds and warm temperatures. Could we see damage like this on early seeded crops? And the question is, what's happening here? Lionel tells me these pictures were taken last year or the year before. There are two different things. In the larger image, you have classical cereal banding, which is from heat at the soil surface. And in the lower, smaller image there, you see some purpling on the leaves, and that is cereal banding caused by cold temperatures at the soil surface as the tender shoot is emerging from the ground. So cereal banding is caused by extreme temperature fluctuations at the soil surface. And like Mitch Timmerman, I can't resist the urge to use some $2 words. This is a diurnal fluctuation. It happens so that there are extremes at 2 times in the day. On a day like yesterday, when we had temperatures up into the upper 20s, you can actually get temperatures at a low residue soil surface nudging 45 to 50 degrees Celsius, and that's hot. So that can scorch tender shoots, and this is the evidence the next day after the plant has grown a little bit, lengthened a little bit. I like to point out that this is most common in low crop residue situations where the soil is black. So it absorbs a lot of heat during the day, lets that heat go during the night. And regardless of whether it's heat banding or cold banding, it's important to know that these effects are transient. That is, they are short-lived. If they're severe, you may see some necrosis or death across a leaf, but to lose one leaf at this stage is not that critical. So in 99% of cases, crops recover completely from this type of cereal banding. Another thing that you might see this time of year if your canola is up and out of the ground is a condition called wire stem. And that can be either abiotic, same principle as what we've just talked about with cereal banding. Extreme temperatures at the soil surface, and you get a pinching right near the where the plant is in contact with the ground, and it is very severe. It's like the plant is hanging on by a thread, and it will probably die over a couple of days. There is a pathogenic condition of wire stem that's caused by rhizoctonia, and that might occur, pardon me, if you have been pushing your canola rotation. Rhizoctonia can build up over time. I wish I had pictures to show you that, especially that distinguish the difference, but I don't. So I'm going to encourage agronomists who may be listening in today, or anybody who's listening in today, if you've got good shots of wire stem and would like to have them used somehow, presented, or if you needed a diagnosis. In either case, this results in a thinning of the canola stand, and unless you've really been pushing it as far as seeding rate at the low end, shouldn't be a long-term concern. Okay, on my little farm at the diagnostic school, the only crop I have in the ground is peas. These were planted on May the 7th. They're now just at ground crack. They're coming out, and I went out there yesterday and dug some, see if I could find any disease. So to look for the earliest signs of disease, whether it's pathogenic or abiotic, you need to dig, need to collect, need to wash the plants and inspect them closely. So the shoots look really healthy to me, and the roots you can't see because they're obscured by soil. The soil is tightly knit to the fine feeder roots that are coming out of that root shoot. So I take them back to the office and clean them up, and this is what I saw. The roots themselves, again, are very clean. The seed coat has done its time. This seed was not treated with a protectant fungicide. Didn't feel it was necessary, starting with clean and certified seed. But peeling away that, what do you call it? The seed coat, I find that underneath one of the cotyledons has a little brown spot. That is probably a seed-borne and pathogenic disease. The only way to tell is to plate it out. May not be a concern, but it's just to tell us that even with the best quality seed, that's not a guarantee of freedom from disease. It's strictly a measure of purity and various other agronomic characteristics. Disease levels should be very low in certified seed. Okay, and what was I looking at here? I used some liquid Treflan a few days before planting the peas, and some that were very shallow might have been planted right into that treated layer. I'm going to talk to Tammy Jones later today about some of these effects. The second question that came in from Lionel, but I think this was from a producer struggling with getting last year's crop harvested, combining spring wheat today and seeing a lot on the ground that is going to volunteer. Because of that, considering wheat on the same field, any concerns about the wheat on wheat rotation? Well, from a pathologist perspective, I would say the biggest issues to think about are residue-borne diseases, the foliar diseases. Tan spot is the one that you would see earliest in the season because it thrives in cool conditions, and later the septoria complex will take hold. Root rots, of course, are compounded by crop-on-crop rotation. Fusarium is definitely there most of the time. Common root rot caused by some other organisms is also a possibility. Take all, if you have been doing this wheat on wheat for some time, that's going to build up. And finally, in a wet condition, Pythium root rot, which attacks the fine feeder roots, is quite possible. By planting wheat on wheat, you'll also be compounding some existing rotational concerns. Fusarium head blight is not something that grows up through the plant and manifests from root infection. However, you have left residues in the field that probably have some of the Fusarium graminearum, Fusarium sporotrichoides, and others on that plant tissue, and so you're at a higher risk when we get into the heat and humidity around flowering. There are probably a lot of other non-disease issues from that kind of rotation, but sometimes it's a matter of I must do what I must do. And I think Anne has seen this same question. She'll probably have some of those perspectives. So that's all I've got to say. I hope there are questions because didn't have a lot to present today.
Okay, thanks, David. I think the one question that I think the producer north of Rossburn was concerned about was, I guess his biggest question is what can you do to eliminate some of the issues? And would you have any comments on that where, you know, would tillage be the answer? Would trying to leave it for a while and get the volunteers growing, or?
I see your point, Lionel. Well, there really isn't a good way to eliminate the residues. Back in the bad old days when Fusarium head blight was a massive issue in Manitoba, there was a lot of interest in burning crop residue as a means of disposal, but that did not prove to be a good method because the insulating effects of moisture in the soil, you don't burn all the residue, especially the stuff that is anchored in the soil. And I think that, yeah, if you can go with a later seeding approach, letting what's going to volunteer emerge and then removing that by tillage, you might eliminate some of the problems of carryover. You'll eliminate the possibility of an admixture of seed if you have different varieties, that sort of thing. And that might be what I was thinking about with non-pathogenic issues.
Okay, good. There'll probably be some questions in the panel discussion. They are staying on with us. So thanks, David, for that. And Lori, if you could give me the screen back, I think we'll get into our panel discussion. And so I'd like to welcome the panel back, our crop scouting panel. And as you can see, the members of the panel are pictured there. Also at the bottom of the screen is my email address as well as Lori Forbes' email address. So if you have questions throughout the week or on something for us to address, definitely send us an email with a question and we will get it on the following week. So I think the first question is going to go to John Hurd, and we're seeing a lot of this lately in the last couple of years, even more and more. We're seeing more broadcasting of nitrogen. So the question that came in is, the weather is 24 degrees Celsius and the winds are 40 to 50 kilometers. How long do I have to incorporate before I lose any significant amount? Straight nitrogen, no coating. Currently taking anywhere from 10 to 48 hours to catch up with the air seeder. So I guess the question to you, John, is how long do they have following the floater, seeding directly into that, and before they start to lose significant amounts of nitrogen?
Okay, well, no simple answer for a complex question. There's a lot of factors that go into place here You expected to hear that. And I think we've been through them before. What are the risk factors? But let me start with the research that was done right in the Brandon area. And under those types of conditions, under warm May conditions like that, Cindy Grant's research 20 years ago showed that you'd lose 40% of the nitrogen of urea if you didn't get a rain in a week. And but how much do you lose in a couple of days? Well, my question to the grower is, I'm seeing in the picture you have there, I see dust. And besides the other factors that affect volatilization, and those factors are, soil pH, texture of the soil, sands are worse than clays, all those other factors, the one is you need moisture for it to happen. And if we are laying urea on dusty soil, bone dry soil, you can go back in 2, 3, 4 days and still find undissolved pellets there. And if you're seeing them, there's no volatilization or very little that's taken place. But if you showed me a picture there of a floater, like what I'm seeing in some of these areas where there is no dust, where the soils are moist, because the only way some of our soils are drying out is through evaporation. And as long as we have moisture at the soil surface and it's coming from below, that moisture can dissolve the urea or 28% and start the process. And with these warm temperatures and winds, we can start having some fairly substantial losses until the soil surface dries out. So your losses will continue either until you get rain. And some of the work shows that you need to have 4/10 of an inch of rain. For people that are not bilingual, that's 10 millimeters. Until you get that much rain, your losses will continue until the soil surface dries out, and then it stops. So that's the question for the grower. 2 days of losses on moist soil are probably, you put the word in here, significant. I'd say, yeah, that's significant. But if it's within 1 day, it may be tolerable. So the farmer is left with, unless I have put my blue boxes out there, many of your agronomists have seen us demonstrate this. We can actually measure these losses. It's quite simple. And I have some losses, some measurements out this year. It's quite simple to measure, but unless you've set up your boxes, you're going to be guessing. The way to know how much loss, if any, you've had is to put a simple nitrogen-rich strip out in the field. So go out there and float on or spread on some excess nitrogen in an area, and then watch the crop. And if in June you see that there's a difference in color or NDVI, or you can see it in a satellite image or with your plain eye, then there's been a loss of nitrogen, and then you either top up with a third or 2/3 or whatever your gut tells you. That's the way to know, or one way to know if you've had losses. I've been talking a lot. I'm ready to.
Okay, just a follow up to that then. So one of the questions he asked as well was, when I do go with the air seeder that's got like 3/4 inch openers, am I covering up enough, or am I doing enough to stop the loss?
Oh, okay. And also with that question, I get questions, is harrowing it enough to put it in, or is light tillage? Remember, what drives the process is moisture. So if we put match up our urea with moisture, then we kind of start the losses. So I think that research out of the East has shown that you need like 2 inches of incorporation to make the losses 0. And we know that you're not getting incorporation at that depth. And so, no, the answer is no, it won't stop volatilization completely. And he's looking for 4/10 of an inch of rain. or using a urease inhibitor. And there's a number of them, like the Agritane or the, there are other ones that are marketed now. You know, just make sure that you're using similar use rates of active ingredient and rate, and you'd expect similar protection as what Agritane would provide.
Okay. And if I'm ready to seed, but the nitrogen's not there or not delivered yet, what are your comments there?
Well, make sure you've got your phosphorus. Put it down with the seed or seeding. There's that's a losing game to try to put phosphorus on later. Yes, you can plant, and then I would say you target your nitrogen ASAP. If you don't have some on at seeding, you would target some, and you would target it either with some type of urease inhibitor or dribble banding, or we even have some people doing in-soil banding with their 1890 type drills. And you can put it in after seeding, or you've got a window to put it in to time it according to just before rain. Lots of options for in-crop nitrogen, but you can either use protection like a urease inhibitor or time it for rain.
Okay, thanks, John. We're going to go on to the next question now, and this one will be for Tammy. Question came in last week regarding glyphosate-resistant kochia and burn-off options in wheat that was already planted.
Okay. Do you want to give me control of the screen?
Oh, okay. Lori,
Sorry.
if you could do it.
And I want to show that one like that, I think. There we go. Okay. So you wanted burn off options. So I chose kochia control options in wheat because I had that developed. And what I could find, some of the things that you could add in with glyphosate to help with your kochia issues, you would probably look at something like bromoxynil. If your kochia is 2 inches or less, bromoxynil could be a pre-plant type of option. Also, there's Fierce, which would have good control. And then the latest one that has been, now I advanced too far. Okay, the latest one that's been announced is Authority 480 in front of spring and durum wheat for pre-seed or pre-emerge up to 3 days after seeding at the low rate of the 88 mils per acre for kochia control. So that is a new label expansion that just happened a couple of weeks ago, and the only thing to look at there would be do not apply to coarse textured soils with low organic matter or very high organic matter or a high pH, because that's going to have some impact. Now, the other question that got thrown into that email was, can we add heat to an Authority tank mix? And that isn't on the label, so not something I would recommend, but you could add in AIM as an option instead. So a different way to get to a similar effect. Does that answer the question adequately?
Yeah, actually, and just an add-on to that, and he had sunflowers in the field last year and used Authority.
Oh, okay. So if Authority has been used the year before, I'm going to have to grab my guide and just make sure that, yeah, we're not doubling up or having some carryover. I don't know the answer to whether 2 years in a row is going to make an impact or not. It doesn't. Yeah, do not apply Authority to fields that were treated with Authority the year before. So not having known that, I wouldn't add Authority year after year, because it's not a recommended practice.
Okay, well, that sounds good, and thanks for the add-on of the AIM there. That's good information.
Yep.
Okay.
You had asked me a couple of other questions. Do you want me to cover those now? Or I had a couple of other questions, or do you want to go back to someone else?
Sure, just go ahead. I've made a couple slides, but you can go ahead and just, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think this is one of the ones that was how windy is too windy or how calm is too calm. And I think right now it's just about wind. So some breeze is good, but dead calm is not good. So anything under about 3 kilometers an hour, we do worry more about volatilization or some off-target movement in that type of a scenario, especially with some of the warmer temperatures that we're having right now. That being said, we're not really worried about dead calm. We have so much wind at the moment, and the spraycast forecast for the next few days is very bad as far as trying to figure out when to spray. So we do need to use caution when the wind is above about 15 kilometers an hour or 9 miles per hour, depending on how you like to measure things. And so my go-to guy is Tom Wolf, and I go to sprayers101.com when I'm looking for how much wind is too much wind. And he really says that somewhere in that 3 to 4 force on the Beaufort scale. So we're looking at 20 to 25 kilometers an hour is probably where you're topping out as far as a spray application. And that's if you're using precautions. And so that means that you're using an appropriate herbicide that will still function well, given that you're going to probably be using a lower pressure for application because you're trying to increase your droplet size. So you're looking for a coarse or ultra coarse type of droplet in order to mitigate the risk of that higher wind. And so that's going to impact on your nozzle type, again, that you have the ability to do a coarse or an ultra coarse. And so something that requires good coverage, a contact herbicide, is not going to be as effective in a scenario where we're using coarse and ultra coarse droplets because your coverage just won't be as good. So you need to change your expectations of how that herbicide might perform. Volatility, probably not the thing that we're looking for. Lowering your boom will also help because winds are less the closer you are to the ground, but you have a range that you can work with there too, because depending on what nozzle you have, you just want 100% overlap. You don't want more overlap and you don't want less overlap than that. So your nozzle type will impact on how low your boom can be, and knowing what's downwind. If you're blowing towards something that hasn't been seeded, there's less chance of it having an impact, especially if it doesn't have any residual type properties. And so that can help with your confidence. If there's a yard site and trees and, you know, an angry owner that's going to be upset about drift, then that's obviously going to be a more sensitive area. So as winds change, you may be able to change which fields you are able to spray into. And then the other question that I think we got was, what is the impact of the lack of rainfall on pre-herbicides? So that depends on a whole whack of factors, including how water soluble the herbicide is, how sensitive the weed is, what stage the weed might be at, if it's just germinating or if it's already emerged, how much of a dose it's going to get to overcome any herbicide tolerance or metabolism, and even how moist the soil was when the herbicide was applied. And in most cases, our soil would have been decently moist when the herbicide was applied, which means that we're likely having it left in soil solution for a little bit longer. So maybe it won't take as much rain to activate, but there's still a lot of difference between some of the herbicides that are out there. So some of the group 2s like Sortan or Permit, the label says modest amounts of rainfall for activation. So to me, modest is somewhere in that 1/4 to 1/2 inch probably. With the group 3s like Edge, Treflan, there's no effect once it's incorporated. It's more of a vapor layer that it's forming. So really soil moisture isn't the most important thing. With the group 5s like Atrazine and Metolachlor, we're looking at probably needing at least a 1/2 inch within 7 days after application in order to ensure that there's good activation. When we go to the other side of Fortress or the Avidex side in the group 8s, then we need a 1/2 inch within 2 weeks of application. With the group 14s like Authority and Volterra, and there are others that don't have any residual soil activity like the Ames, that type of thing. But for Authority, the label says 10 to 20 millimeters, which apparently is 4/10 to 8/10 according to John Hurd's math. I just learned that within 10 to 14 days. For Volterra, we're looking at rain or irrigation shortly after application, and it doesn't specify an amount. And then with the group 15s, the focuses, the Ziduas, we need a 1/2 inch shortly after application, whereas Dual 2 Magnum says within 10 days we need that 1/2 inch of moisture. So there's the quick and dirty answer for how much rainfall you need. That being said, so hopefully a 1/2 inch, and you've probably got decent activation with almost all of the soil actives. The other side of it is if you get too much, if you get an inch or two, some of them will move, like atrazine will move down the rooting zone and stuff like that. So you've got to be cautious about too much rain as well. Okay, I'm done now.
Okay, before you leave, I'm going to ask you, we got a question in regarding the question we had about kochia control in wheat. And the question is, what about adding dicamba as a post-seed, pre-emerge, and crop zone to wheat?
So dicamba can be used in that use pattern. Again, caution about the volatility of dicamba and it drifting to something off target. It does need to be, if you look at the dicamba label alone, I don't think that it actually has, yeah, it needs to be like a dicamba MCPA or a tank mix for getting control of kochia. So in a soybean or something, you know, that has the glyphosate tolerance, then that XtendiMax or one of those types of products would provide decent control as an early control option. The other thing I totally forgot to mention when we were talking about how windy is too windy is that there are products out there, so the drift reduction agents that can be added into your spray tank as well. The one that is commonly marketed in Manitoba is Interlock, and it impacts on the viscosity of the spray and changes the droplet size as well. And so I should have mentioned that as well, that Interlock can help with making those droplets less likely to be driftable fines, and so it can help mitigate the risk again, but it doesn't eliminate the risk, especially in strong winds.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up to, is there any concern about 2,4-D residual on soil for pre-seed and post-seed?
Yes, so there are crops that are sensitive. I did a great job of demonstrating that last year at Crop Diagnostic School. So 2,4-D and MCPA both will linger on the soil. It does depend on growing conditions, and different crops have different sensitivities. So in front of canola, it's a no-go. I'm very tentative about it in front of corn too, because it can have some impact there. It is registered for pre in front of some of the cereal crops, but you do need to look at the label of the 2,4-D or MCPA product that you're utilizing to ensure that the label does have that pre-seed or early post-seed pre-emerge application registered on the label to make sure that you have crop safety.
Okay. Lori, if you could give me the screen back. Okay, and okay, David answered this one. This one goes to soil management, so I'm going to give it to John Hurd. When you get the dry and windy conditions, do I increase my packing when seeding? Does land rolling make sense?
You really want me to tackle this one? Okay. From my perspective, yes, packing is good, unroll packing, and but don't don't come talk to me if you get real wet, because we know packing is a fine line between packing dry soil or compaction on dry soil to create good moisture conditions. The seedbed is a good thing. It's a bad thing though if we get really wet soils, which we have within the province, and we can lead to sealing or crusting. So it's, you know, kind of up to that grower to decide. Dennis could jump in, but I'm no fan of land rolling. It's a practice that's done even when there aren't stones to shove down, and it simply just pulverizes any aggregates at the soil surface, and when the wind blows, it fills the ditches. So land rolling, when required, yes, but if it's just part of your tick box recipe, then it could be considered. And Dennis may want to jump in here and mention when are appropriate times to land roll, if when are the options to do it in crop. So I'm going to kick that ball over to Dennis right now.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Yes, this is a topic that comes up every year. This year, you know, even though things are getting really dry on top, we have some very wet soil underneath, and compaction could be one of the issues. But the challenge that I have now is that if that topsoil gets really dried out, and let's say you want to roll your soybeans and you don't have any stones, and that's the key, you don't have any stones to deal with, I would elect not to land roll in that situation. Now, if you're in a soil that has stones, but the soil is very dried out, drying out in the top layer, I would look at potentially rolling after seeding. So after the beans are up, after the first trifoliate has emerged, and rolling on a warm, windy day. That way, you know, you eliminate that risk of soil erosion now. You do have a fairly wide window to roll. You anywhere from, you know, first trifoliate to second trifoliate in that time range. You can go a little earlier as long as you're past the hook stage. But you know, if your soil is dry on the top, I would recommend not rolling, especially with these winds that we have now, because you're going to see a lot of soil moving around, and I think your best bet would be in that situation to wait. If you have to roll for stones now and soil conditions are good to roll, then that's probably the only option, or the only way I would recommend rolling at this point is if you have stones to deal with.
Okay, and a comment just came through that you can save on some diesel too. So next question. Okay. And continuing with the dry conditions, we're starting to get some calls regarding seeding depth, and do I start to chase soil moisture, and how deep is too deep? So I'm going to throw this out first to the canola guy and see what Dane has to say regarding canola, and should we be chasing moisture with canola, seeding canola?
I don't have Dane on the call currently,
Okay.
Lionel.
Okay, sorry about that. Then we'll go to Anne and get her to talk about the cereal crops.
And you might want to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Now I'm, I think everyone can hear me now. The recommendation for wheat, oats, barley, and corn would be a recommended seeding depth of 1.5 to 2 inches. So for barley and corn, I wouldn't really recommend going deeper than 2 inches. And for wheat and oats, you could go a bit deeper, say 2.5 to even 3 at a maximum. But deeper planting in general isn't recommended just due to delayed emergence, reduced plant stands, and reduced yields. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend going too much deeper than that recommended depth.
Okay, and Dennis, I'm going to ask you about peas and soybeans, because I guess a lot of the peas will probably be in already, but I think a lot of producers are going to start with soybeans here, and that'll be a question that'll be coming up.
Yeah, I'll just kind of do a quick review of peas. Field peas, you can plant deeper if you are looking for moisture. Going down to 2 inches, you know, if soil conditions are very dry, peas will push through that. Now, if you look at soybeans or in edible beans in the same mode, I wouldn't go any deeper than 1.5 inches. We've had growers over the years, and we've seen this where growers have gone down to 2 inches to try to chase that moisture. And whether it's soybeans or dry beans, they just take forever to come out of the ground. And the stand reduction in some cases is dramatic. So it's a lot riskier doing that. And I know some growers do that with soybeans, and they go a little deeper, but they don't plant the whole farm at that depth. They will start and hopefully get a little rain, and by the time they finish, they'll be able to be at a more reasonable depth. So for soybeans, 1 to 1.5 inches max. For dry beans, same thing, 1 to 1.5 inches max. The best thing I can do, though, or recommend to you is when you start seeding, check your seeding depth often, just to see if you're actually hitting moisture at a shallower depth. Because if you can do that, the crop's going to come up a lot quicker. And especially now, our soil temperatures are starting to warm up, but down deep, we still got some cooler soil temps. So just keep those things in mind.
Okay, Lori, can we turn the screen over to David Kaminsky? And he's got a photo he'd like to show us that has something dealing a bit with planting too deep as well.
Okay, there I am, sorry. Yeah, this picture was sent to me by agronomist Amber Nags last spring, and it was from a cereal crop that was seeded too deep. So it was forced to lengthen the subcrown internode as much as it could, but still hadn't reached the surface. And you can see on that subcrown internode that brownish decay. That is the common root rot that I was referring to earlier on. You'll see it best by wiping away the coleocular sheath, which is a papery coating that protects the plant until it's out of the ground. And the plants are obviously stressed from having to push too far. So it predisposes them to this type of root rot. And then once it's set in, that can progress to the other secondary roots. Those are the primary roots down at the base by the seed. The secondary roots will be produced at the top of that subcrown internode later on. And so it's setting things up sometimes for difficulty going on when you seed too deep.
Okay, good, Dave. And that's later on, a lot of those ones will be the whiter kind of heads in the field. And if you pull them out, they come out right from the root system.
Lionel, that's probably more prevalent with take-all, another root disease that I mentioned. But yes, actually, and it's when all of the heads on one plant are white. Then you'll go down to the base of the plant and look for a black plaque, which is the fungus growing on the culm, the exterior of the base of the plant. That would be an indicator of take-all root rot. Common root rot may or may not cause white heads in plants.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Laurie, if you could give my screen back. Okay, Tammy answered that one. And I think there was one more question before I go to that slide that just came in. John Gavlosky, this one just came in. Question regarding flea beetles, and have you been noticing or have you had reports of flea beetles showing up already?
Short answer is yes. There's definitely flea beetles flying around and moving into wherever there's cruciferous plants up, which is probably more your volunteer canola and wild mustards and things. Mainly it's been striped flea beetles that I've been seeing, and that's just in the Carmen area. Even in my yard, I can find the odd striped flea beetle. So they're certainly out, and which isn't surprising. They're the earlier emerging of our two more dominant species in canola. So we expect there'd be more crucifer flea beetles probably starting to come out anytime soon. But they certainly are out. With this warmer weather, they will be quite active. Now, they don't like to fly when it's windy, so the last couple of days, even though it was warm, they would have been not as actively moving about. So cool temperatures, wind, they can both restrict their movement, but they are out, I guess is the short answer.
Okay. And would they be all throughout a field of volunteer, kind of like a canola field from last year? If you were walking throughout the whole field, you should be able to see them anywhere?
Sometimes you do get edge effects, and a lot does depend on temperature and wind conditions. When it's up until the past week, they wouldn't have been moving too far because when it's in the low teens to mid-teens, their flight muscles just aren't as effective, and they don't move too far. They'll move shorter distances. You have these edge effects, and again, wind can kind of cause that to happen as well. If we get a calmer day with the temperatures we have, then they would really move much further into the fields, and things would be a bit more uniform. I wouldn't be surprised if there's still some edge effects in some fields that they are in.
Okay, thanks, John. And I think that's all the questions that I have now for the panel. So I'm going to continue on with a few closing slides here. We've been talking about dry conditions and seeing this map put up on Twitter, the U.S. weather map for precipitation for the next 16 days. So definitely looking like they're showing some rain coming our way. And also just this is from the Brandon station, or South Brandon station, and looking at Saturday and Sunday where we might be looking at some precipitation as well. Sunday calling for 100% chance, but we all know that the forecast is only as good until you go outside and see what is actually happening. Another reminder, we're starting to get into spraying season, and a lot of the spraying questions are coming in, and a handy book to grab is the Crop Protection Guide. They're available at the offices, $10. Probably best to call ahead just to make sure that there's somebody there to meet you, or that there's available books there. The seasonal reports, they're coming out as a weekly basis now, whether it be the crop growing conditions, the insect and disease updates, the weather maps are on there. Spraycast is a good thing to be looking at. Again, all of these things are available through the Manitoba Ag website, so definitely go there. Follow us on Twitter as well. Farm production extension specialists across the province. There's 9 of us. If you've got questions, feel free to contact these people. They definitely have been working in the industry for a long time and can help you with a lot of the questions you have. And if they don't have the answer, they definitely know where to find it for you. So definitely give these people a call. There's Lori Forbes's email address again for your certified crop advisor credits. And with that, join us next week, May the 27th, for the next edition of Crop Talk. Thanks for attending.